Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Jeffrey Lyles, welcoming you to another installment of Lyles Figure Files. I'm not going to go any further without dedicating this episode to one of my all-time favorite wrestlers, the one and only, the bad guy himself, Scott Hall, aka Razor Ramon. Got this cool elite figure from Mattel, and one of my favorite attires from him, the purple and the black, of course, the gold accents, and my favorite incarnation, my favorite version, the actual version, Scott Hall from his NWO Outsiders days. Now, totally factual here. Every time my brother and I would go down the Toys R Us aisle, I would hit the Outsider strut, hitting this, bam, taking a toothpick, the whole deal every time we would go. My brother would come up behind me, do this, the Diesel Kevin Nash deal. That was just our thing every time we walked down the aisle. So there's no Toys R Us anymore. And sadly now, I only have Scott Hall in my memories, but there's lots of really great matches, really good figures to celebrate his life. So let's continue that theme of celebrating wrestlers from back in the day. PowerTown, where wrestling lives on, is setting out to do maybe the impossible. They've announced they've signed over 150 wrestlers, many of which have never had figures made in their entire careers. And when you think back to all the decades of great wrestlers, memorable characters, it's kind of wild that there's still so many that haven't gotten figures. PowerTown has revealed their first wave of figures, and it's a pretty exciting lineup because it's actually holding true to that promise of releasing first time ever legends. And I know that's always exciting when Mattel hits them and it's like, yes, you finally got this guy off the list. I remember one of the deciding factors for me in going over to Mattel, because I had a massive collection of Jakks just throughout the year. So their bone crushing line, their RA, R3 lines, like I had everything, their finishing moves. I had so many Jakks figures, and I was like, I don't want to do this all over again. But outside of the impressive scale where The Undertaker and Rey Mysterio were not the same size was the fact that they were getting legends that I'd never seen before in the 6-inch format. So that was Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. That was Macho Man, because he was the one guy that Jakks was never able to get. So as soon as the doors opened for Macho Man, it was like, okay, I'm all the way in, no regrets. The Von Erichs. So there were just so many figures that were like, oh man, they're getting these guys in figure form. And that's the excitement I have for PowerTown right now, where it's like, who else can you do? This opens up so much, and there's so many great figures through wrestling history that, so many great characters in wrestling history that deserves that figure treatment. So their very first wave, we're getting Vern Gagne, we're getting Luthez, two Hall of Fame first ballot icons who, were around long before figures of wrestlers became a thing. So you knew that why they hadn't gotten figures, but because the NWA Classic and AWA Classic weren't really highly regarded, by the time wrestling figures became a big thing, I mean, that was the myth of Hulkamania. And it's not like you could sell companies on a Luthez, a Vern Gagne. They weren't going to sell out at Toys R Us and KB Toys. So it was like, okay, they're just never getting done until now. Then we've got Stan Hansen. And I've been a huge fan since I first saw him come through the NWA and just terrorize the promotion for a few months. Beat up Lex Luger and, take the U.S. title and just run amok over everybody. He was so much fun. I've gone back and watched a lot of his Japan matches, his AWA matches. That was my first exposure, and I wanted a Stan, the Lariat Hansen figure ever since. So getting him, we're also getting Ted DiBiase from his tag team with Hansen. So that's really cool, because most of the time with Ted DiBiase, we're just getting $1 Million Man. So we're getting that laughing, cackling face expression in the suit, maybe not even in wrestling form. But this time we're actually getting Ted in wrestling attire with the chaps, the vest, the whole deal, even the headband. And this opens up the possibilities, I've said before, of a Mid-South version where he has a removable glove hand. That would be amazing. So we can get both his time as a part of the Rat Pack, Devastation Incorporated, And then when he's teaming up with Hacksaw and Dr. Death against the Freebirds, and just doing the thing right before he leaves to go to WWF. We're also getting Magnum TA, new version of him. Mattel did knock him out, but this figure, at least from the head sculpt, looks a little bit more impressive, so I'm hoping that actually is the case with the actual finished version. And we're getting Kerry Von Erich. Now, one other cool thing about this line is they've already mentioned we're getting Bobby Duncan Sr., Bobby Duncan Jr., and there's so many scores of wrestlers to go. So I'm excited, so excited about that, because there's so many guys who have never gotten that. And I understand from a certain perspective where Jax and Mattel both were just like, we can't sell figures of these guys, and we're fans of these guys, but we're never going to be able to put them out on the shelves and have them sell. You guys complained about Junkyard Dogs stacking all these figure picks, and Junkyard Dog was a much bigger star to the mainstream audience than Luthez, Vern Gagne, Stan Hansen. So we get it, but now in PowerTown, there's an opportunity to get some of these luminaries in figure form. So I decided, why not break out a list of my top 10, in no particular order, top 10 figures, top 10 wrestlers that deserve figures. Now, in some cases, I'm super cheating because I'm putting together tag teams, but, I'm not going to split a tag team just for the sake of keeping this honest. But anyway, let's start off with my number one team, my number one squad that's for some reason just managed to keep missing getting figures. The Fantasticks. Bobby Fulton, Tommy Rogers, absolutely the best tag team to make use of the Fabulous Ones, bow ties, vests, strutting gimmick. They really did it up well, and they had great feuds, great matches wherever they went, whether it's Mid-South, NWA, All Class. They were always doing it. Whether they were fighting the Midnight Express, the Varsity Club, the Sheep Herders, legendary tag team, and it's crazy that they have not managed to get figures so far. So hopefully PowerTown can erase that right away and get the Fantastics, because their match against the Midnight Express, Clash of the Champions 1, is one of those all-time, man, you haven't seen that match before? And here, let's go to YouTube. Let's go to the WWE Network and watch it right away. It's that good. And their entire 1988 run in the NWA was just great. They had really good feuds with the Sheep Herders in Mid-South, UWF. They also fought the original Midnight Express in World Class. So, these guys were great. Tommy Rogers has one of the top 3 best drop kicks ever, probably next to AJ Styles, Coco Beware. And Bobby Fulton just had this charisma where he wasn't the most talented. He wasn't like, oh man, Bobby Fulton's the best wrestler ever. But he just had something. He had that spark, that sizzle, that team with Rogers. They worked. He was spunky, smaller guy, but he came off as tough, even though he wasn't 6'7" or something. So these guys absolutely would definitely be a choice for me for PowerTown's line, and hopefully they get included. Next up, we've already gotten one. And to me, this is the most important figure. Maybe Mattel can get him. Hopefully PowerTown can, but David Von Erich. David has been, or was, the fixture of the Von Erich trio, and it was just the 6, where it was just the 6-man group of Kevin, Kerry, David. David was a standout. He was the tallest one of the 3 brothers. He was poised to be the NWA World Champion. He was having good feuds with Harley Race, good matches against Ric Flair, and he just seemed destined to be that guy. And again, I've gone back through and rewatched a lot of wrestling history back from the early 80s. I started as a fan basically right when Hulk Hogan won the belt from Iron Sheik. And so I've gone back in the late 70s and just kind of gorged on all this stuff from before my time, and just really went over to all these different promotions, so like Pacific Northwest, Southern Championship Wrestling, Southeastern, all over, Mid-South, UWF, AWA. And David really stood out to me from his world-class days. He was just such a great wrestler, smooth. He had such an aggression to his promos. I mean, he seemed like he was going to be a huge star for the rest of the 80s. And of course, he tragically died in 84. And it was just like, gosh, You could see the air let out of world class, and it took a lot longer for it to actually finally go out of business. They had to sell off to USWA, but it really felt like the first serious blow to world class was when David Von Erich died. And David was such a mega superstar that he was going to keep that promotion going with his two brothers, Kevin and Kerry, Mike getting a slower opportunity to come up in the promotion, not be forced into the David role, and not have everybody going, he wrestles just like David, when he didn't. And it wasn't fair to Mike, but Mike's a different story for later. But David Von Erich 100% needs a figure. Hopefully, PowerTown is able to scale these wrestlers properly so David's taller than their Kerry figure, but he's really a guy that we desperately need in figure form. We've gotten Mike, we've gotten Kerry, and we've got Kevin in tag teams and solo versions from Mattel with their Elite line. And I wouldn't mind getting a Kevin from PowerTown either. I thought that the Mattel sculpt was a little dodgy on the Kevin head sculpt. Kerry was okay, but this PowerTown sculpt looks a lot better. So a David in this format, so we could have all three brothers, hopefully, would be really good. And David doesn't need a lot of accessories, just his trademark hat, his vest, and call it a day. And he's definitely somebody we need for this line. Next up, we're going to go to Smoky Mountain because I'm trying to cover a lot of promotions here. We're going to Smoky Mountain. We're going to knock out Dr. Tom Pritchard and the Gigolo Jimmy Del Rey, a.k.a. the Heavenly Bodies. These guys were my first exposure to them was from the Aftermags and just reading all this cool stuff. There was a period in time where it was ECW, Smoky Mountain, as really being these promotions where a lot of exciting stuff was happening after the fall of the Dangerous Alliance and Hogan coming back and ruining everything in WWF for a minute. And it just felt like these renegade promotions were really exciting. So in Smoky Mountain, Stan Lane and Tom Pritchard invaded WCW for a second, and then they kind of did their own thing. Stan left and got replaced by Gigolo Jimmy Del Rey, and then they did their thing in ECW for a minute. It was just so much fun, that whole excitement of these promotions that we couldn't see, at least in Maryland, because they were just regional promotions. But I was reading every magazine I could get, tracking down every tape I could of these promotions. And thanks to YouTube, it's so much easier. But the Heavenly Bodies were such a fun tag team. They had a lot of versatility in terms of how they fought. They could just brawl, or they could do some cool Midnight Express-esque moves and tag team maneuvers. So basically, the Heavenly Bodies were one of those ahead of their time tag teams, because I feel like if they had just been able to last a little bit longer in the WWF to the Attitude Era, they would have been able to survive for a long time. It was just that they were in there that dumb period where there weren't a lot of good tag teams. It's basically the Smoking Guns and nobody else. But yeah, they were a really good tag team throughout. They traveled the circuit like an old territory tag team would do. And I really think they would make for some cool figures. So hopefully PowerTown can incorporate cloth robes to get their full, plush, lavish, obnoxious whole deal together. Maybe they can also sign an arrangement with Jim Cornette so we can get him. So maybe I'm cheating again to include Cornette in this fold as well. We don't need to change up his attire. It's just the obnoxious suits and a tennis racket. So let's go for, instead of two, all three of the Heavenly Bodies and throw in Jim Cornette as their manager. So that's another one. Next up on my list is the Golden Boy, Dan Spivey. And I'm not necessarily wanting the flowing hair with the bangs Dan Spivey. I'm talking about the crew cut, angry Dan Spivey, who can fill in as the second half of the Skyscrapers, carrying on to tag team with Sid Vicious and later Mean Mark Callis, and the guy who had a really great hidden gem of a match with Lex Luger at Wrestle War 91, where it was just like, oh man, Dan Spivey may actually beat Luger for the belt. And Spivey was a really good wrestler, whether it's in tag team, whether on the solo front, he could do his thing. And he was just towering and annoying in that sense because he just was so loud. You kind of got that from Stan Hansen from his time over in Japan. He was really cool. And he also has the benefit of being a Varsity Club member. So if we get a figure of him, we would get our first Varsity Club member from, in this modern era of 6-inch figures. I would love to see the Varsity Club in total, but let's start off with Danny Spivey, because we've already got both sets of his tag team partners with the Skyscrapers. So we can finish it off, get a Dan Spivey figure with that crew cut, and then we were all set with him. I would love, of course, to get a Waylon Mercy. The dude didn't have a great wrestling career in the WWF, but his gimmick, his whole thing was great. So I don't know if this is one of those deals like DiBiase and Kerry Von Erich where Mattel can do it so they can use the WWF licensed character Waylon Mercy and get a figure out. But I would love to get that NWA kind of solo on his own version as well. So Danny Spivey is definitely on my list too. And we're going to continue with the NWA theme. We're also going to go with my man, Ronnie Garvin. It's funny, so ironic, because when I first started watching the NWA, he had just defeated Flair for the world title. So I was like, oh, this guy's cool. And he was slapping the skin off of Flair, knocking everybody out with his hands of stone. I really thought he was cool. And I didn't realize until way after that he just had a token reign so Flair could get the title back at Starrcade. I just thought the hands of stone was cool. And then he had stints in the AWA, and then he went over to WWF. And they didn't really use him as well as I thought they could have. But Ron Garvin is a super tough, really fun guy to watch in matches and literally go to his NWA 80s matches with Flair, the Horseman, Tully Blanchard in particular. You'll see some really great hard-hitting matches that still hold up today. And he had some really good matches with his brother, Jimmy Garvin, against the Rougeau brothers over in Montreal. So check those out on YouTube. They're really worth checking out as well. Garvin is real simple. Just the head sculpt and fist and his towel. And that's all you need. And I think he's a guy that PowerTown could do justice with in terms of the head sculpt. And he's a really basic, simple guy. And I think that's kind of the whole deal with PowerTown, where they're going. It's not a lot of flashy gimmicks, not a lot of colorful costumes, just some legends of wrestling that really should be honored with figures. We didn't see that from Jax. We didn't see that from Mattel with Ron Garvin, and he's NWA champ, so he should be made into figure form just because of his history as a champion of the NWA. One of the few guys who beat Ric Flair when that really meant something. So that's my case for Ron Garvin. And I'd love to get a Jimmy Garvin as well, just at some point so we can have another tag team, but definitely Ron Garvin. So now I'm going to go to World Class because I got to switch this up a little bit. World Class is one of my favorite promotions to watch on cable. It was like this grand revelation to me when we got access to AWA, to the Legends of World Class. So I was watching the historical run of World Class when I saw it on ESPN, and the later stages of the AWA where the Midnight Rockers were still there, where Kurt Hennig was the champ, and they were getting all the castaways from the NWA and WWF. But back to World Class. One of my favorite gimmicks with the whole mysterious look, the spraying mist, was the Great Kabuki. And I thought he was such a cool character, had one of the better thrust kicks / super kicks of his era by far. It was one of those deals where when he hit it, it was like, ooh, that's it, match is over. And he just looked cool. He had that samurai mask, and Gary Hart was just doing a thing, really treating him like he's special. He had the Singapore cane, kendo stick, whatever you want to call it. He just looked cool. And he's a guy that has a little promotion flexibility. He was in World Class. He also spent some time over at Mid-South and Florida as well. So you can do a lot with him. He would add a little bit of flair, no pun intended, to your collection and the PowerTown's outlet, just because he looks a little bit different than the standard tights and robe guys we've been mentioning before. So he would be a really cool, unique looking figure. Now I want to stay in World Class with my next one. It's a dynamic duo, not Batman and Robin, of course, but Gino Hernandez and Chris Adams. Chris Adams was a really good face in World Class, but it wasn't until he teamed up with Gino Hernandez and started fighting Kevin and Kerry Von Erich that he really took off as a super mega star, where people were like, oh man, am I team Von Erich or am I team dynamic duo? And those two had really great matches with the Von Erichs. After the Freebirds left out the World Class, it was kind of like, what are they going to do? And Hernandez, Adams kept that promotion going because it was one of those deals where anytime you put the four of those against each other, you're going to get a great match, lots of intensity, fun, excitement. The fans were into it. And that was probably the last great world-class feud. After that, it's kind of, we're going to make this guy into a superstar by fighting Kevin and Kerry. And, I mean, they had to start resorting to Black Bart as the champ. And it just wasn't the same. But these guys really need figures because they were two major cornerstones of world-class. And I understand why we haven't seen them. They're really that regional niche performer from a Mattel, from a Jack's perspective, but from fans who grew up or caught up watching these guys as superstars in world class. Chris Adams would go on to Mid-South / UWF, have a little run there. He spent some time in WCW in the Monday Night Wars era, but he was really a major deal in his time in world class. And he, of course, is owed a little bit of wrestling honor and gratitude for training Steve Williams, aka Stone Cold Steve Austin. So if for no other reason, we deserve a figure. He deserves a figure for his role in one of wrestling's greatest wrestlers. All right, so that's the dynamic duo. Moving on to another promotion, and this one's an interesting one because he's pretty famous, had a good run in Japan, but he had a really brief but great time in WWF. I'm talking about Hakushi. And this one, I can cheat because he's not necessarily his likeness, his whole deal, the tattoos, the white pants, is not just limited to his time in WWF. He also did that in Japan. So we're covered there. We're all straight. And he had great matches against Bret Hart and Chris Candido. And it was one of those cases where he was too good, and some people in that promotion were probably a little bit too jealous to let him shine too much. So he's got to go team up with Barry Horowitz and get out of the spotlight. But he's a cool looking character and somebody that probably would never get done from Mattel's perspective just because of the legal hoops that they've got to go through, and because Hakushi's probably nowhere near WWE's legend. Hey, we got to get on their radar. Like, he's not somebody, hey, who's left to sign to a legend deal? Oh, right, Hakushi. Here's where PowerTown would really come in handy, knocking out a guy who deserves a figure. Because he just looked cool. He looks like a toy, like an action figure. And he would just look really great with our WWE figures. So let's get him in there, PowerTown. Last two are tag teams. So I'm going to go with one of my favorite AWA tag teams, Bad Company, Paul Diamond and Pat Tanaka. These guys were so cool, they made me forget how cool the Midnight Rockers were. They came out with these blue ripped up pants and vests and came out with the Diamond Dolls. Diamond Dallas Page was towering over them, but he still made them so cool. And I have watched so much of Tanaka and Diamond over in CWF, fighting in Memphis, but when they got teamed together in AWA, it was a whole different story. They looked so cool as a team, and they had really good matches with the Rockers. They had good matches with basically anybody they were teamed up against. So these guys, again, not on the radar of Mattel. Now, maybe we could get the Orient Express, but I don't know with today's modern climate if that would be considered an offensive tag team name to release. So maybe they'd have to do them as solo, but either way, I would prefer them in their much cooler attire as Bad Company. So love to see them in that. And finally, the last team on my list, my last choice for this whole deal is Public Enemy from ECW. Rocco Rock, Johnny Grunge. Now, people who watch them now probably won't have the same appreciation as those of us who watched them in their ECW peak, where they were the most ridiculous team, acting like they were street hoodies and just really making that gimmick work. And then going in to have these crazy matches in ECW. And they could have great brawls with the Funk Brothers, or tear it up with Benoit, Malenko, Sabu, and Taz. I mean, they just did their thing in ECW. They had great feuds with the Gangsters as well. Two Gold Scorpio became Two Gold Scorpio. And the Sandman. Public Enemy was great. And for whatever reason, maybe the WWF machine, people don't look at them as like, oh man, we should have Public Enemy figures. They're kind of scoffed at. People go, oh, they weren't as good as the Dudley Boys anyway. But really, Public Enemy, TPE, was really fun, really entertaining. And I know they had those garbage outfits in WCW when they were there, but I want the black and silver jerseys that they started rocking, and they just look really cool in ECW. And, you know, maybe I'll put in my Here Comes the Hot Stepper every time I get figures of those guys, but I would love to see them. I think they would be an ideal choice for PowerTown, because again, they're probably not anywhere on the radar of Mattel, maybe not even Shelly Toys, but these guys were real fixtures of ECW and really are deserving of figures, because I mean, if you go like you can't go past the top 20 important characters in ECW history and not mention Public Enemy. I would argue they are top 10, but if you want to be funny and go Dudley Boys, okay, whatever. But really, top 20 at the very least, and they're so entertaining. Like, I should try to track down some promos, some interviews from them from back in their days, in their heyday, especially when they were helping Mikey Ripwreck get tougher so he could fight the Sandman. Anyway, that is my list of wrestlers, top 10, that I really hope that PowerTown makes figures of in a lot of cases for the very first time. And I want to see these guys in figure form, put them in my collection, have them standing next to luminaries like Scott Hall, and do the thing in the collection. So PowerTown, it's all on you now. You're my only hope. But let me know what you guys think. Let me know what figures, what classic wrestlers that have never gotten 6-inch treatment you want to see made in a figure form. And maybe we'll see some of these guys come down the pike in 2022 and 2023. All right, thanks so much as always for watching. This episode of Loud's Figure Files has been filed.